I rented the cheap basement studio because my lease ended fast, my paycheck didn't, and I needed a key in my hand by Friday. I was a pharmacy tech doing closes. Plan was simple. Sign the sublease, move 2 totes in, sleep, work. The first night, I just measured the room, checked the outlets, and texted my boss I could cover weekend shifts. In the listing, it looked clean. In person, it felt like a mouth. Low ceiling, one little window at sidewalk height with bars, paint that smelled fresh in a desperate way, and stairs steep enough to make you brace a hand on the wall. The kitchen was a sink, a hot plate, and a mini fridge that buzzed like a wasp. I told myself it was temporary and kept swallowing that lie. The guy showing it to me wasn't friendly, but he wasn't obviously shady either. Clean jacket, clean shoes, keys, clicked his belt. He asked where I worked, what shift, if I ever had people over. He asked if my job did random tests. That last one made me pause. He didn't. He just watched me answer like he was collecting it. He had the sublease printed and tabbed. Deposits circled. Month to month, no drama. He said, like drama was something I carried. I read enough to feel responsible and not enough to be safe. I signed because my old landlord was already texting about lock changes, and I wasn't sleeping in my car in January over principles. That night, I hauled my stuff down in 2 trips. 2 totes, air mattress, a pillow. I set my phone on the only outlet that held a plug, checked the lock twice, and lay there listening to the house above me. Footsteps, a toilet flush, someone laughing at a TV. Then the basement went quiet in that heavy way where you hear your own blood. At 12:38 a.m., my phone pinged. Email from him. Subject line, addendum required. Attached PDF, late fee schedule, guest policy, inspection rights, and a paragraph about cooperating with law enforcement requests. It read like somebody loved paperwork more than people. I skimmed, clicked the signature box, and hated myself. I told myself it was normal landlord bullshit. I went back to sleep with my keys under my hand like that meant anything. Next morning, my manager called me in early. Not text, a call. Her voice was tight. She said HR needed to see me immediately. I drove in thinking I'd messed up a count or someone complained about wait times. Pharmacy is constant complaints. This was different. They sat me in the back office with the printer whine and the stale coffee smell. HR and my manager, both acting like they'd already decided who I was. HR slid papers across the table, printed screenshots, my full name, my job title, my new address, a list of deliveries with dates and times, a photo of a brown bag on concrete steps with my basement window in the background, a cropped shot of the text thread where a contact saved as tech talked about extras. It was bullshit, but it looked clean. HR asked if I was diverting medications. That word, diverting, made my stomach twist because it's the word that ends careers. I said no. I said anyone could fake screenshots. My manager asked why I didn't tell her I moved into a basement like I was hiding bodies. HR said they had to report it. Calm voice, flat eyes. We have to protect the business. Then they took my badge and walked me out like I was already dirty. My manager kept repeating, "This is serious," like I didn't know. I asked if they'd called the number in the screenshots, if they'd checked whether the texts were even mine. HR said, "We're not investigators." I snapped back that they sure as hell were acting like judge and jury. That finally got a reaction. My manager's face tightened, and HR wrote something down like my tone was another piece of evidence. I drove home shaking. While I pulled up, the basement door didn't sit flush. It always stuck, but this time it resisted like someone leaned into it from the inside. I looked down and saw a folded tarp shoved under the jamb like a wedge. Placed. I yanked it out, and the smell hit me the second I pushed the door open. Sweet rot, chemical cleaner, and warm pennies. Metallic and wrong. The air felt warmer than it should have. My totes had moved. Not stolen. Moved. One lid sat open like a mouth. I hadn't opened it. On the floor by the tote was a tiny zip bag with pale tablets I'd never seen. Not my meds. Not pharmacy stock. Just enough pills to make a cop's eyes light up and my life collapse. I didn't touch it. I backed up like it could bite, and my brain started doing that stupid bargaining thing. Try to invent a normal explanation. I called the landlord. He answered on the first ring and sounded bored, like I was calling about a light bulb. I told him someone had been inside. I told him there were pills on my floor, and my job just got hit with a complaint. I asked, steady, why the fuck there were pills in my unit. He said I should read the lease, and hung up. I called back. Voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I was still staring at my screen when I heard tires on gravel outside and a car door slam. I went to the little barred window and saw a patrol car idling at the curb with the lights off. Then another one rolled up behind it. They came down the steps like they'd been here before. One knocked like it was polite. I opened because I didn't know what else to do. They had paper in hand. A printed copy of my lease with my signature highlighted like a damn trophy. One officer said they received a report of controlled substances and that the property owner consented to entry under the lease. I tried to explain fast. New tenant, complaint at work, pills planted. I have photos. I didn't touch anything. The officer didn't argue. He just kept his eyes on the room like he'd already seen the ending. I told him not to search my stuff. The officer tapped the lease and said I'd already agreed to inspection rights and entry. My chest went hollow. They put gloves on and started opening cabinets, lifting the toilet tank lid, digging through my tote like it belonged to them. I kept saying, that's not mine, like repetition could build a wall. They found a bag on the floor. Then one of them reached behind the hot plate and pulled out another bag, same tablets, like it was scripted. I hadn't even cooked. I hadn't unpacked. But there it was in his gloved fingers, held up for the other officer to see. They didn't look shocked. They looked satisfied. They cuffed me right there. Tight, metal biting. My wrists started burning. I kept talking because silence feels like consent. I told them to check the email timestamps, to check why the complaint hit my job the same morning, to look at the tarp wedge. One officer told me to stop resisting. I wasn't resisting. I was shaking in socks, watching my life get folded into their version of events. They walked me up the stairs and out with my hand behind my back. Cold air slapped my face. Curtains moved across the street. At the station, it turned into fingerprints, a photo, and questions that weren't really questions. By the time I got a call, I used it on my sister, and I hated how small my voice sounded saying I needed help. In the holding area, I sat on a plastic bench that still had someone else's warmth in it. A guy across from me kept tapping his knee and staring at my scrubs like he could smell where I worked. When an officer walked by, I asked again to see the report to know who complained. He said, it came from the property, and kept walking. That phrasing stuck. Not a person, not a witness. The property. When my sister picked me up, she didn't cry. She got mad. She asked why I signed anything after midnight, why I called the landlord instead of 911. Why I ever thought cheap didn't mean trap. I snapped back that I needed a place to sleep, and she went quiet for a second, like she remembered what that feels like. Then she said, real flat, we're getting your stuff and you're never going back alone. When I got out, my manager had already emailed about pending termination. HR left a voicemail about mandatory reporting. The landlord never answered again. The listing vanished. The office address on the lease was a mailbox store. I stared at those little metal doors and felt like the dumbest person alive. I went back to the basement with my sister to grab my stuff. The door didn't stick. No tarbuch. The room looked reset. My totes sat where I'd originally placed them, lids closed, neat like someone posed them for a photo. The smell still hung in the air, sweet rot and cleaner in pennies, like the room itself was laughing. After that, it was court dates and money I didn't have, a lawyer who talked in flat prices, and a license board that suddenly treated me like a risk. Friends texted less after they heard arrest. My whole life shrank because one stranger decided I'd make a good target and I'd done the only thing he needed. I signed. I walked out that day with my wrists burning and my job gone, and I realized the trap wasn't the basement. It was the part of me that thought signatures make you safe. Me taking a side job cleaning out storage units was supposed to be dumb muscle work. It was a fenced lot behind a strip mall. Motive was quick cash. Role was a contracted cleaner. Plan was bag trash, sweep, photograph, move on. The manager handed me a master key and told me not to poke around. I've been scraping rent together any way I could. This gig was off an app. Clean out needed, paid same day. I showed up in work boots, brought my own bags, figured I'd be done by lunch. The manager didn't do the friendly small talk. He scanned my ID, made a copy, then said the rules like he'd said them 1,000 times. No dumping in restaurant bins. Take photos before and after. Don't open sealed boxes. And again, that line, don't poke around. He said it like it was about safety, but his eyes didn't match his voice at all. He gave me a cheap camera and a clipboard and walked me down the rows. From a street, it looked like any storage place. Big sign, balloons on the fence, families loading minivans. Inside the gate, it felt tighter. Cameras everywhere. Quiet except for traffic and the occasional bang of a roll-up door. The manager kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting on something. Unit 118 looked normal at first. Mildewed couch, busted fan, old kid toys. The door groaned when I rolled it up. Warm, stale air hit me in the face. I snapped the required photos, pulled on gloves, started filling bags. Fast food cups, old clothes, broken plastic. The couch was the big thing, so I grabbed it by the arm, dug my heels in, and dragged it forward. That's when I saw the plywood. Fresh panel, clean cut, screwed into the back wall. Everything else in that unit looked like it had been sitting for months, but the screws were bright and had little curls of metal around them like they'd been drilled yesterday. I stood there with the couch half moved and felt my body do that stop and listen thing. I didn't hear anything. That almost made it worse. I should have shut the door and walked. Instead, I got stubborn. I hate being told don't look. It lights up something dumb in me. I pulled the screws. Behind the panel sat rows of jars. Not pickles, not preserves. Hair, fingernails, teeth, all suspended in cloudy liquid. Each jar had a neat label with a first name and a date, written like an inventory tag. Some hair looked freshly cut. Some nails had bits of dried skin still clinging. Teeth sat at the bottom like white stones. My brain tried to make it props until I leaned closer and caught that faint chemical stale smell that didn't belong. Under the jars was a stack of Polaroids. Candid shots. People walking to their cars. People at gas pumps. A kid holding a leash. Then one of my own face, squinting in sunlight. Keys in my hand, my apartment lot in the background. My stomach dropped so hard I almost gagged. My hand started shaking and I dropped the screwdriver on the concrete. The clang echoed and my brain screamed at me to shut up and leave. I took photos with my phone anyway. Wide shot, close-ups of labels, the Polaroid of me. My signal inside the unit was garbage, so I tried to text a couple to myself and watch the little sending wheel spin. I tried to start a video and my thumb kept missing the button because my hands wouldn't listen. I called the manager. He didn't sound shocked. He sounded pissed. He asked why I was breaking property. I said there were jars of teeth in there and a photo of me. He told me to step out and wait by the office, like I was the one causing trouble. I backed out of the unit, kept my phone in my hand, and walked toward the office with my shoulders up like I was bracing for a hit. I thought about hopping the fence. Then I remembered my car was inside the gate, and the gate needed a code I didn't have. I kept looking at the cameras, suddenly aware of where everyone pointed. 10 minutes later, the manager came back with 2 guys. Not staff. No uniforms. Big, quiet, moving like they'd rehearsed. One hung back like he was watching exits. The other walked straight at me. I started talking fast, pointing back toward 118. The manager cut me off and said I'd violated the unit seal. He smiled while he said it, which made my skin crawl. He said they could press it, meaning charges. He kept repeating customer property like it was a shield. I lifted my phone and told him I had pictures. The big guy grabbed my wrist and twisted. Not a punch, not a struggle. Just pressure until my fingers opened. My phone slid out like it belonged to him. I lurched for it, and the other guy stepped in front of me, chest out, hands low like a bouncer. No jilling, no drama, just control. I told them I was calling 911. The manager made a little shrug and said go ahead. Then he picked up my clipboard and held my ID copy for a beat, just long enough for me to notice, and slid it into his folder like he wanted me to remember they had my name, my address, all of it. He called the cops like he was ordering food. While we waited, they kept me right where the cameras could see. Office door, bright light, clean angle. They talked over me if I tried to speak, repeating damaged property and attempted theft like they were reading off a checklist. I kept my hands visible because suddenly I understood any move I made would become aggressive on paper. When the officer arrived, I unloaded the whole thing. Hidden panel, jars, teeth, Polaroids, my photo. I told him my phone had proof and they'd taken it. The manager immediately handed him incident paperwork like it was the only thing that mattered. We walked to Unit 118. The couch was back in place. The plywood panel was flush and dusty like it had been there forever. Nobody screws, no metal shavings, no jars, nothing, just a dirty wall. I yanked the couch forward anyway, and the manager snapped that I was damaging property again. The cop told me to calm down. I pointed at the wall and kept saying it was right there. I unscrewed it. I saw it. I photographed it. My voice got higher, and I hated myself for it. The officer asked to see my phone. The manager handed it over like he was doing me a favor. The cop scrolled my camera roll. Nothing. Deleted folder empty. Even the text thread to myself had nothing pending, nothing failed like I'd never tried. My mouth went dry. I felt my face go hot, that stupid embarrassed heat you get when you know you look insane. The officer looked at the paperwork again. Civil matter, he said. Stop trespassing. He told me if the storage place wanted to file a report for damage or theft, they could, and I should leave now. I asked why he wasn't even writing down what I said. He shrugged and said there was no evidence and it was private property. They walked me to my car like I was the problem. The manager stayed polite, even cheerful, telling the cop he appreciated the quick response. Then he turned to me and said I was banned from the property and corporate would hear about it. He said he'd flag my profile, so I couldn't take jobs at any of their locations. By that evening, it wasn't just that site. My name got blocked across the whole chain. By the time I got home, the gig app had already emailed me. Client reported misconduct, payment withheld pending review. I tried to dispute it and got canned responses. I called the storage chain's main number and got transferred until someone told me they stand by their manager and that I was no longer welcome on any of their properties. Like I was a thief because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to recover the photos anyway. I plugged my phone into my laptop, ran every recovery program I could find, paid for one because I was desperate. It pulled up old screenshots and nothing else. No jars, no laves, no Polaroid. I went to the police station the next day to file a report for intimidation and got told the incident was already logged under the storage place's complaint and I should stop escalating. That phrase stuck in my throat. Like telling the truth was the escalation. I changed my route to work, moved my car to a different lot, even killed my social accounts because that Polaroid proved somebody had been watching me up close. None of it helped. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach clenched like it was about to be them. After that, my life got smaller. I checked the peephole before I opened my door. I stopped taking late shifts. I catch myself listening for footsteps in the hall like a fucking animal. I started seeing the same dark sedan on different streets and telling myself it was nothing, but it kept showing up in ways that didn't feel accidental. Once it sat across from my building for an hour, I watched it from behind the blinds until my eyes burned. It didn't move. I couldn't see a driver. I couldn't do anything without feeling like I was stepping into their frame. A week later, a jar showed up on my porch in a cardboard sleeve. No note, just hair, floating in cloudy liquid, and a label with my first name already spelled right. Me and my wife bought a cheap little house in a small town because we were tired of roommates and rent spikes. The place was 2 streets off the main drag. Motive was stability. Role was new homeowners. Plan was patch drywall. replace locks, keep our heads down. Our first week was paint, pizza, and trips to the hardware store. We slept on a mattress on the living room floor and ate standing up because the table hadn't arrived yet. I kept telling myself, quiet year, build a life, stop hustling. The trouble started with a bright orange notice stapled to our door. Code violation, unpermitted occupancy, unsafe steps, improper refuse storage. It was bullshit. The steps didn't wobble. The trash bin had a lid. I tore the paper off and left the staple holes like little bites in the wood. I figured some board office screwed up the address and we'd straighten it out with one phone call. Next morning, a guy from inspections rolled up and walked through our yard like it belonged to him. No hello, no name. He just took photos and scribbled. He didn't ask permission. He didn't even look at the house like a home. He looked at it like a problem to be solved. I stepped off the porch and asked what he needed. He pointed at the steps with his pen and said they were out of compliance. That phrase came out clean, like he'd said it 1,000 times. My wife came out behind me and gripped my shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise later, the way she did when she could feel me about to lose it. The guy kept walking, clicking pictures, ignoring us like we were background noise. We tried doing it right. We went to the town office. We filled out forms. We paid a fee. They stamped a receipt and sent us home with that dumb sense of relief, like adults playing by the rules. A week later, we got a letter saying our application went missing. I called and got bounced around until someone told me nothing was on file. I drove down there with the receipt in my fist. The clerk stared at it like I'd handed her a joke. She said, flat as a wall, that a receipt doesn't mean it was received. I asked what the stamp meant then. She shrugged. I asked her name, and she pointed to a tiny plastic badge like I was the asshole for not reading it. We resubmitted and got hit with another fine, now doubled. The date on it was before we resubmitted, like time didn't apply to them. I went back to argue. The person at the counter smiled like I was a kid complaining about homework and blamed the system. Every time I asked who made the decision, they hid behind a screen. Every time I asked for a supervisor, the supervisor was in a meeting. Always. I started noticing the language they used. No names, no signatures, no one you could corner. Just processing, pending, standard procedure, words that sounded neutral while they squeezed. Then our water got shut off for non-payment, even though I had the receipt. That's when it stopped feeling like paperwork and started feeling like somebody testing how far they could push. I came home from work, turned the faucet, and got that dry cough of air. My wife stood there holding a sponge, staring at me like I was supposed to explain it. I drove straight to the utility window and slapped the receipt on the counter. The clerk looked at my proof and kept saying the balance was what the computer shows. I told her to fix it. She said she couldn't. Then she said, almost kindly, that I should talk to someone who can help with your situation. Like we were the kind of people who needed a handler. When we got back home, my wife snapped at me for going down there alone, like I was daring them to escalate. I snapped back that somebody had to push because if we just smiled and paid, they'd bleed us forever. We stood in the kitchen talking over each other until we both ran out of breath. Then we went quiet and moved around like strangers, careful not to touch the wrong nerve. The next day, the neighbor across the street finally came over while I was carrying groceries in. Friendly guy, flag on the porch, perfect lawn, smile like a salesman. He asked how we were settling in. I told him we were dealing with code stuff and trying not to lose our minds. He nodded like he already knew. Then he leaned in and said we should talk to his cousin, a local contractor, knows how things work. He said it like advice, like he was doing us a favor. My wife didn't say anything, but her eyes went cold, and I could feel my stomach drop because it clicked all at once. This wasn't random. This was a funnel. That cousin showed up that night. No call, just headlights in our driveway and boots on our porch. He had a clipboard and a pre-filled contract with our address printed at the top, like he'd already claimed us. He named a price that made my teeth hurt. It wasn't fix the steps money. It was drain your savings and still owe money. He pointed at the line where we signed and acted like it was the obvious next step. I told him no, not politely. I told him to get the fuck off my property. He laughed, like I just performed for him. He left the contract on the railing like a threat and walked back to his truck slow, unbothered. Next morning, our driveway got tagged as an illegal curb cut. A towing notice appeared on the windshield. We hadn't touched the driveway. It was there when we bought the place. I called the number on the notice, and the guy on the phone sounded bored, like he'd done this to 100 people. He said we could get towed at our expense if we didn't remedy the violation. I asked how you remedy something you didn't do. He told me to call code enforcement. Code enforcement told me to consult the approved contractor list. The Cousins Company was right there, clean and official, like a punchline. I called again and asked for an appeal process. They told me appeals take time and fees continue to accrue. They said it like weather. A church wellness check showed up later that week. 2 women in matching shirts asked if we needed help with housing stability. They smiled too hard. They acted like we were one argument away from the street. I asked who sent them. They said they'd heard concerns. Concerns about what? They didn't say. They just looked past me into my house like they were counting boxes, like they were taking notes for someone else. After they left, my wife locked the deadbolt and slid the chain like we lived in a bad neighborhood instead of a postcard town. We weren't fighting a person. We were fighting a network. Every door we knocked on opened into the same set of hands. Different counters, same answers. Different uniforms, same tone. I started saving everything, photos, letters, receipts, like I could build a wall out of paper. It didn't help. The inspection guy came back and walked the property line, photographing the same spots, daring me to do something stupid. I told him to leave. He said he was in the public right-of-way, while his shoes sat in our grass. He held his phone up like he was ready to record me. I realized the trap again. If I touched him, I'd be the violent new homeowner threatening a public servant. So I stood there shaking, fists tight, and watched him document our life like it was evidence. That night, a truck idled outside our place for a long time. No headlights, just that low engine hum, like a throat clearing. My wife told me not to go out. I sat on the couch with my keys in my hand anyway, jaw clenched, listening. The sound finally faded and left this nasty silence behind it. We barely slept. We jumped at every porch creak, every tire hiss in the street. The house stopped feeling like ours. It felt like we were borrowing it until they decided we were done. The final notice came in a plain envelope. Condemned pending compliance. Condemned. Like the house was rotten. Like we were squatters. I read it twice and felt my face go hot, then cold. We went to the office again. The clerk didn't even blink. She said it was standard procedure. I asked how you condemn a house without stepping inside. She said it wasn't about inside, it was about compliance. She printed a list that included the same made-up violations and a few new ones I'd never heard before. I asked who added the new items. She pointed at the printer like the printer did it. I asked for a name. She said, "It's handled by the department." The department. Like a monster you can't see. They didn't board the place up. They didn't drag us out. They just waited. They waited for the fines to stack. They waited for my wife to crack. They waited for us to run out of energy. We fought about stupid shit because it was safer than saying the real thing out loud. Tape. Boxes. Who forgot to buy markers? At one point, my wife sat on the floor with her head in her hands and said she felt stupid for believing in starting over. I wanted to promise we'd win, but I could feel the trap closing, and I hated that my best argument was just hope. We packed under the buzzing kitchen light, sweating, listening to someone's truck idle outside for an hour. The sound came and went like whoever it was just wanted to remind us they could. I loaded the car until my arms ached. My wife wiped down counters like cleaning could undo any of it. We left things behind on purpose just to move faster. A cheap lamp, half a roll of drywall tape, the stupid welcome mat we bought because it felt normal. We loaded the last box before dawn. The street looked normal, quiet, innocent. That almost pissed me off more. As we drove away, I saw the inspection guy standing with a neighbor, laughing, already pointing at our house like it was inventory. This happened when I worked as a receptionist at a vet clinic and thought my life was too boring to be interesting. It was a suburban strip. Motive was health insurance. Role was front desk. Plan was check-in appointments, scan rabies tags, go home. My biggest fear was an angry doodle owner, not anything real. The place was loud in a steady way. Phones, nails on tile, the printer chewing paper, somebody always yelling a pet's name like it mattered. I kept a box of milk bones under the counter and a bottle of hand sanitizer that left my skin cracked. I knew the rhythm. First wave of drop-offs, then surgeries, then meds pickup, then the afternoon parade of limping dogs and panic cat carriers. I did the boring parts that kept it moving. I verified addresses. I read rabies tags like I was reading license plates. I smiled until my jaw hurt. That was it. That was my life. Then I started getting password reset emails for accounts I didn't open that day. Not one, a bunch. Banking stuff, retail, some random streaming login I hadn't used in years. At first I laughed and deleted them. I figured it was a typo or a bot or some idiot trying random emails. I didn't feel special enough to be targeted. 2 days later, I got a text from my phone carrier about a SIM change I never requested. That one hit different. It wasn't a sketchy link. It was the short code they always use, the same tone as billing alerts. My hands went numb, and I stared at the counter like it had answers. I stepped into the hallway by the bathroom because the lobby had clients, and I didn't want anyone hearing me freak out. I called to block it, and the agent asked for my security PIN. I didn't have one. I said that's simple. She asked again like I'd misunderstood the question. I told her I never said a PIN. She paused, then said there was definitely a PIN on the account. I asked when it got added. She said weeks earlier. Weeks. Like someone had been in my pocket for a month, and I'd been walking around smiling at Labradors. I tried verifying myself every way she offered. Name, address, last payment amount, last 4 security questions. She kept circling back to that PIN like it was the only god in their system. Without it, she couldn't remove it. I started swearing, not at her, just into the air. I asked for a supervisor. I got put on hold. The whole music sounded like a prank. Finally, someone placed a temporary freeze on the swab and told me to go into a store with my ID. I went back to the desk, and the whole day felt wrong, like the world had a thin film over it. Every time the phone rang, I thought it was going to be the carrier again telling me I'd lost. Every time my own phone vibrated, I flinched. I kept checking the email app, watching for more reset requests, like I could catch a hand in the cookie jar if I stared hard enough. After that, the coincidences got sharp. My email signed out by itself on the clinic computer. A password I'd used for years suddenly incorrect. Reset links showing up already opened. Little new device logged in, alerts at 3 a.m. that I only saw hours later because I've been asleep like an idiot. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. It was death by paper cuts. Then the guy showed up at the counter. He didn't look like a movie villain. No hoodie, no twitchy eyes, no crazy grin. He looked like somebody's co-worker who runs marathons. Clean shoes, calm hands. He waited in line behind a woman holding a shaking chihuahua, like he understood basic manners. When it was his turn, he leaned in and said my full name, first, middle, last, like he was checking a box. I froze because my badge didn't have that. Only my first name. He asked how long I'd been on that shift and if my manager was still the same person. He said her name like he'd met her. He asked what time I usually switched with the other receptionist. I didn't answer. I just stared, trying to decide whether to hit the panic button we didn't have. He slid a folded paper across the counter. It looked like a form at first. It wasn't. It was a typed anonymous complaint about me mishandling control meds. It used the right words. It listed drug names I'd heard tech say. It talked about logs. Counts the lockbox. It included a date where I'd been working. It made it sound like I was stealing, like I was high, like I was a hazard around animals and drugs and needles. He said it calm, like advice, like we were talking about my car needing an oil change. He said he didn't want to see me get in trouble, and I should get ahead of it before it got sent in. That's when the rage kicked in, fast and hot. I didn't get clever. I didn't threaten him back with some perfect line. I just told him to get the fuck out loud. The lobby went quiet for half a second. One of the techs looked up from the scale. My manager's office door cracked open. The guy didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just smiled like I'd prove his point and walked out. My manager dragged me in her office and shut the door. She asked what that was. I showed her the paper. I watched her read it and watched her face change from annoyed to careful. Not protective, careful. She asked me if I'd touched control meds. I said no. I told her I couldn't even open that cabinet. She asked if I'd ever been alone in the treatment area. I said sometimes when I grab forms. She nodded like she was storing that. I started explaining the password resets, the SIM swap attempt, the PIN I never set, how it felt connected. I heard myself and hated how it sounded. Like a conspiracy rant. Like I was unstable. My manager didn't say I was lying. She just said we had to take complaints seriously, and she'd look into it. Then she told me to take a breath and go back out there because the lobby was full. So I did. I sat behind the counter with my throat tight, greeting people like my life wasn't actively being peeled open. That night, a food delivery arrived that I didn't order. I opened my apartment door, and there was on the mat, warm, greasy smell leaking through the bag. The receipt had my name slightly wrong, like someone was testing spelling and the card ending wasn't mine. But the address was mine, and in tiny print it had my unit number. I just moved. I hadn't even updated my address with half my accounts yet. I hadn't told people at work because it didn't feel necessary. Somehow it was already used to put a bag of food at my door. I didn't eat it. I carried it straight to the trash, then pulled the receipt back out because I needed something I could hold as proof. My hand shook like I'd had too much caffeine, except I hadn't eaten all day. The next morning, my bank flagged suspicious activity and froze my card. It happened while I was trying to pay for gas on the way to work. Declined. I tried again. Declined. I stood there at the pump with cars waiting behind me and heat crawling up my neck. I moved aside and called. They read off charges I didn't recognize. Small ones first, then bigger, like someone was dialing and how far they could push. They asked me to verify identity, and I answered every question with this ugly certainty that it didn't matter what I said because somebody else already had my answers. Later that day, my landlord emailed me about noise complaints. Noise. For me, I'm not a party person. I barely talk on the phone at home. The email claimed neighbors heard screaming and banging. It mentioned dates when I'd been at the clinic. It said if it continued, they'd have to take action. I read it 3 times and felt like the floor dipped. Then my boss got a call about a welfare check because I was acting unstable. Not the police at my door, but a call to my workplace. Someone trying to frame me as the problem in a way that would cost me my job. My manager pulled me aside again, voice soft like she was handling glass. She asked if I was okay. She asked if I needed time off. She asked if I had anything going on. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Liability, risk, paperwork. I told her I was fine because if I said anything else, I'd be confirming the story someone was writing about me. I went to the phone carrier store with my ID and stood at the counter while they treated me like a dumb customer until they found the PIN on my account. They could see it had been added weeks earlier. They could see the SIM swap request. They could see it wasn't from my device. They said words like identity theft, like it was a weather report. They changed the PIN, locked things down, told me to use 2-factor. Like a checklist could undo the feeling of being watched. I filed a police report. The officer took notes like he was bored. He asked if I had an ex. He asked if I clicked weird links. He shrugged when I said no. He said these things were hard to track. That was it. That was the help. I tried going offline. I changed numbers. I moved. I paid cash. I stopped using my usual email. I made new passwords until my brain fell shredded. I froze my credit. I turned on alerts for everything. I stopped posting online. I didn't even tell friends details because I didn't want my own mouth spreading my address. I started checking my car before I got in it, like I was living in a bad neighborhood, except I lived in a normal place with a pool and dog poop stations. It didn't matter. My information was already a product, already sold, already copied into somebody's notes. The last thing I got was a postcard with a photo of the clinic parking lot taken from across the street. No message, just a date and a time. My next shift already circled.